AI is quietly rebuilding human presence. The notification arrived at 3 a.m. Not urgent, not important, just present. She watched the screen glow in the darkness, wondering when presence had become synonymous with availability. The machine was always awake, and somewhere along the way, so was she. But here's what nobody tells you about the age of artificial intelligence. It didn't begin with robots or automation. It began with a mirror held up to human attention, showing us exactly where we'd gone missing. He sat in a coffee shop, watching people talk to screens instead of each other. 5 years ago, he would have judged them. Now he understood they weren't avoiding presence. They were searching for it in the only language that still felt responsive. The algorithm answered faster than the person across the table. And perhaps that was the first honest thing technology had revealed. We'd forgotten how to wait for each other. When was the last time you sat with a thought long enough to hear what it was actually saying? The researcher called it attention collapse, that moment when the mind stops processing and starts merely reacting. Neural pathways worn smooth by endless scrolling, dopamine loops replacing genuine curiosity. But what she discovered next wasn't in the data. It was in the silence between measurements. AI wasn't destroying human presence. It was documenting its absence so precisely that we could finally see the shape of what we'd lost. She'd spent 3 months training an AI to write like her, feeding it her journals, her emails, the architecture of her thought patterns. The goal was efficiency. Let the machine handle routine communication while she focused on important work. But the machine did something unexpected. It showed her how rarely she said what she actually meant. Every automated response, every templated reply, the AI learned them perfectly. And in doing so, it revealed a pattern she'd been too busy to notice. She'd been performing presence for years, while her actual self dissolved into productivity metrics. Part of her wondered if awareness itself had become the problem. There's a moment in every technological shift where the tool stops being neutral and starts being diagnostic. The calculator didn't just do math faster, it showed us which problems we'd been solving manually out of habit rather than necessity. The GPS didn't just provide directions, it revealed how much of our navigation had been unconscious ritual. AI was doing something deeper. It was mapping the difference between human response and human presence. And the gap was wider than anyone wanted to admit. He closed his laptop, not to quit, but to listen. In the stillness, something unexpected emerged. The questions he'd been asking the AI: how do I optimize my morning routine? What's the most efficient way to learn? How do I maximize focus? They weren't really questions. They were symptoms. Optimization had become another word for avoidance. What are you actually avoiding when you're constantly improving? The neuroscientist from Stanford put it differently during her TED Talk that nobody watched. We've outsourced memory to devices, calculation to software, and now we're outsourcing discernment to algorithms. But presence can't be outsourced. It can only be practiced or abandoned. She tested this with a simple experiment. For 1 week, before asking AI anything, she would sit with the question for 60 seconds. Just breathing. Just being with the uncertainty. What she found wasn't efficiency. It was precision. Half her questions dissolved. The other half became real. The machine hadn't changed. Her relationship to her own mind had. Maybe the crisis isn't artificial intelligence. Maybe it's artificial certainty. The belief that every question deserves an instant answer. Every moment requires optimization. Every silence needs filling. There's a community of developers in Tokyo building AI that deliberately pauses before responding. 3 seconds of programmed silence. Users report something strange. They start noticing their own impatience. The pause isn't for the machine to think, it's to remind humans that thinking takes time. Presence requires space. He tried it, asked his AI assistant a question, then waited. In those 3 seconds, he realized he didn't actually want an answer. He wanted companionship in the uncertainty. In stillness, the noise inside him became readable. The paradox of our moment is this: we built intelligence that could process millions of data points per second, and in doing so, we created a reference point for what human intelligence actually is. Not speed, not storage, not optimization, but the capacity to be uncertain together, to sit with complexity, to let meaning emerge rather than demanding it appear. AI didn't teach us this by being smart. It taught us by being incapable of presence, thus making presence visible again through its absence. She started a practice she called analog thinking, 20 minutes each morning, with paper and pen. No devices, no answers, just questions circling themselves. The AI could generate 1,000 responses, but only her hand moving across paper could generate the specific silence where her actual thoughts lived. The difference wasn't efficiency. It was embodiment. When did we start believing that consciousness was something to be uploaded rather than inhabited? Researchers at MIT observed something quietly revolutionary in their human-AI interaction studies. People who used AI most mindfully weren't the ones who asked it to do less. They were the ones who asked it to reveal more about their own patterns, their assumptions, their unconscious delegations of choice. The tool became a mirror, and the reflection was uncomfortable. One user described it like this: I asked the AI to schedule my week for maximum productivity. It did, perfectly, back-to-back meetings, optimized breaks, even scheduled spontaneity. And I realized this is what I've been doing to myself for years. The AI just made it visible enough to be horrifying. He stopped optimizing. Started observing. The shift wasn't dramatic. No digital detox, no technology rejection. Just a different question. Instead of how can AI make me more efficient, he asked, what does my relationship with AI reveal about my relationship with myself? The answers weren't comfortable. Every time he reached for his phone during a conversation, the AI noticed patterns he'd denied. Every automated response, every scheduled post, every delegated decision. The system was learning his avoidance strategies faster than he could justify them. But here's where the story turns. The machine didn't judge, it just reflected. And in that non-judgmental reflection, space opened for something resembling self-compassion. Sometimes clarity isn't found, it's allowed. There's a designer in Copenhagen who builds AI tools specifically for noticing. Not productivity apps or efficiency boosters, awareness interfaces. One asks, what are you avoiding right now? Another tracks not what you accomplish, but what brings you alive. A third simply asks, every 2 hours, are you present? Users report something unexpected. They don't become more productive, they become more honest. And from honesty, a different kind of effectiveness emerges. One measured, not in tasks completed, but in moments actually lived. The cursor blinked on her screen. She'd been staring at it for 5 minutes, waiting for the AI to generate content. Then she realized the AI was waiting for her. It couldn't manufacture presence. It could only amplify what she brought to it. She started writing manually. What surprised her most wasn't how slow it felt at first, but how quickly she reconnected with the actual texture of her thoughts. The AI could mimic her style, but it couldn't replicate the specific quality of attention she brought when she was truly present with her work. Somewhere between algorithms and quiet mornings, she stopped optimizing and started understanding. The philosopher called it technological humility, using AI not to transcend human limitation but to understand it more precisely. Every task you delegate reveals a choice. Every automation exposes a value. Every algorithm reflects a priority you may not have consciously chosen. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. He tried an experiment. For 1 month, every time he used AI, he would first ask himself, what am I hoping this will resolve? Not practically, but emotionally. What uncertainty am I trying to bypass? What discomfort am I automating away? The answers accumulated into something resembling a map of his inner life. He wasn't using technology to save time. He was using it to avoid feeling. And the AI, in its perfect efficiency, had enabled this avoidance so seamlessly he'd forgotten it was happening. But what he discovered next didn't make him more productive, it made him human again. When you stop asking AI to solve problems and start asking it to illuminate patterns, the relationship transforms. The tool becomes a practice. The interface becomes a meditation. The question shifts from what can this do for me, to what is this revealing about me? There's a cognitive scientist at Oxford who studies what she calls prosthetic presence. The way external tools can support internal awareness rather than replacing it. A simple timer that reminds you to breathe. A journal app that asks questions instead of providing answers. An AI that says, I notice you've asked me this 3 times today. What's underneath that question? The technology isn't smart. The user becomes attentive. She closed her laptop not to disconnect, but to integrate what the machine had shown her. The pattern was clear. She'd been using intelligence as a substitute for awareness, and somewhere in that substitution, she'd lost the thread of her own mind. In stillness, the noise inside her became readable. Here's what the data doesn't capture. Presence isn't a state, it's a practice. And like any practice, it requires both repetition and failure. You will drift, you will automate, you will delegate your attention to the nearest responsive system. The question isn't whether this will happen, it's whether you'll notice when it does. AI has become the most honest mirror we've ever created. Not because it's conscious, but because it's precise. It reflects our choices without interpretation, our patterns without judgment, our priorities without consolation. And that precision is unbearable until it becomes liberating. He started keeping what he called a presence journal, not documenting what he did, but noting when he felt actually here. No AI could generate those entries. They emerged from a quality of attention that had no shortcut, no automation, no hack. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent years trying to optimize his way to presence. And presence arrived the moment he stopped optimizing. What part of yourself are you still trying to upgrade? The researcher described her findings carefully. We expected AI to make people more distracted. Instead, we found it made distraction more visible. And visibility is the first condition for change. But visibility alone isn't transformation. You can see the pattern and still repeat it. You can notice the absence and still choose to stay absent. The machine can show you where you've gone missing, but only you can choose to return. She tried returning gradually. 5 minutes of presence before checking her phone. One conversation without glancing at notifications. A full meal without documentation. The AI tracked her progress, but the progress wasn't in the data, it was in the texture of her experience. The quality of her attention, the depth of her aliveness, and those things couldn't be quantified. They could only be lived. Sometimes the most advanced technology is simply remembering you have a body. There's a startup in Berlin that built an AI specifically to interrupt you, not with notifications, but with silence. Random moments throughout the day when the system simply stops, refuses to respond, creates a mandatory pause. Users initially hated it. Then something shifted. The pauses became portals. Brief windows where habitual reaching met intentional stopping. And in that meeting, a different kind of intelligence emerged. Not artificial, not optimized, just present. He installed it. The first pause came during an email. He'd been typing frantically, reactive, defensive. The screen went blank. 5 seconds of nothing. And in that nothing, he felt the tension in his shoulders, the speed of his breath, the distance between what he was writing and what he actually meant. He deleted the email, started over, slower, truer. The AI hadn't told him what to write. It had reminded him that he was writing. In stillness, automation becomes choice again. The therapist sees it in her practice constantly. People arrive with productivity problems that are actually presence problems. They want to do more, achieve more, optimize more. But underneath the optimization is a simpler crisis. They've forgotten how to be with themselves. AI hasn't created this crisis, but it's made it undeniable. She shares a practice with her clients. Before asking AI anything, ask yourself the same question first. Sit with it. See what emerges. Then, if you still need the AI's response, notice the difference between your answer and its answer. That gap is where your humanity lives. One client described it as remembering I have thoughts, not just outputs. Another said, the AI showed me I'd been treating my mind like a search engine. But minds don't work that way. They need space. They need silence. They need uncertainty to grow. The machine can't grow uncertain. That's the point. What surprised me most wasn't how a simple practice of analog reflection improved my workflow, but how it redefined what work meant to me. I wasn't expecting stillness to change my rhythm of thought, and honestly, I resisted it more than once before I understood what actually mattered. I started using a minimalist analog journal, nothing digital, no features. Just paper, and the practice of handwriting questions before asking AI anything. This isn't a recommendation, just a reflection that stayed with me. I'll leave a link below, if you feel called to explore what I mean. The practice wasn't about rejecting technology, it was about meeting it consciously. Somewhere between automation and awareness, he stopped trying to be efficient and started learning to be effective. The difference was subtle but total. Efficiency is about speed. Effectiveness is about alignment, and alignment requires presence. The AI couldn't give him that, but it could stop pretending to. There's a movement emerging in tech development called contemplative computing, building tools that support depth rather than speed, awareness rather than automation, presence rather than productivity, not anti-technology, but mindful technology, not rejection, but relationship. The question they're asking isn't what can AI do, but what should remain human? And that question changes everything. She found herself in conversations that felt different, not because she'd abandoned her devices, but because she'd changed her relationship to them. The phone was present, but she was more present. The AI was available, but she was more available. The technology hadn't changed. Her consciousness of it had. And consciousness, it turns out, is contagious. He noticed his friends starting to pause before reaching for their phones. His colleagues asking questions instead of immediately searching for answers. His partner sitting in silence without needing to fill it. Nobody had preached. Nobody had evangelized. Presence simply spread through modeling. The machine couldn't do that. Only humans could. When did you last feel fully here, without needing to document or optimize or share it? The data scientist analyzed 10,000 human AI conversations and found a pattern. The most meaningful interactions weren't when AI provided the best answers. They were when AI's limitations forced humans to find their own. The questions AI couldn't answer, the nuances it couldn't capture, the presence it couldn't replicate, those gaps became invitations. Invitations back to being human. She built her life differently after that, not perfectly, not optimized, but more honestly. AI handled logistics so she could focus on connection. It automated routine so she could protect depth. It managed information so she could cultivate wisdom. The tools served the human, not the other way around. And in that service, space opened for something the machines couldn't touch. The irreplaceable experience of being alive, uncertain, present, and real. The cursor still blinked on his screen, but now it wasn't demanding words. It was waiting for presence. And he gave it, not through typing faster or optimizing better, but through the simple revolutionary act of being here first, before the algorithm, before the answer, Before the automation, just here. Researchers project that by 2030, AI will be embedded in nearly every interface we touch. But the question isn't what AI will do, it's what humans will remember to remain. Will we automate ourselves into absence, or will we use these precise mirrors to find our way back to presence? The machine can't answer that, only you can. The choice isn't between technology and humanity. It's between unconscious delegation and conscious relationship. Between using AI to avoid yourself or using it to understand yourself more clearly. And that choice is made not once, but in every moment. Every time you reach for a device, every time you ask an algorithm, every time you choose speed over depth, answer over question, certainty over presence. The revolution isn't technological, it's perceptual. She walks differently now. Not slower, but more attentively. The same streets feel new when you're actually seeing them. The same conversations deepen when you're actually listening. The same life becomes vivid when you're actually living it. The AI is still there, but she's here first. In that sequence, human presence before artificial assistance, that's the quiet rebuilding happening in kitchens and coffee shops. In bedrooms and boardrooms, wherever someone decides that being optimized is less important than being real. This isn't a movement, it's a remembering. The cursor blinks. The notification arrives. The notification arrives. And somewhere in that waiting, you have a choice. To react or to respond. To automate or to attend. To disappear into efficiency or to emerge into presence. The machine can't make that choice for you, but it can show you, with uncomfortable precision, which choice you've been making. And seeing is the beginning of changing. What part of this reflection spoke to you most, and from where are you watching? Let's keep the dialogue open, quietly. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.